أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد صلى وعلى بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أما بعد فقد قال أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب عليه الصلاة والسلام في خطبته من نهج البلاغة العرب قبل البعثة. In this khutbah number 26 of Nahj al-Balagha, the first section talks about Asr Jahiliyyat, the time of Jahiliyyat. Imam alayhi salatu wasalam begins by talking about that era, and he gives, I don't know why the screen is shaking like this, and he gives examples by talking about these people whom Imam was dealing with. He said, إن الله تعالى بعث محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله نظيرا للعالمين وأمينا على التنزيل وأنتم معشر العرب على شر دين وفي شر دار. If you look at the khutbah at a glance, regarding the motivation behind Imam Ali delivering this sermon, the researchers believe that it was delivered after Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr was martyred, Egypt was occupied by Muawiyah's agents, and Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr was martyred. A group of people, came to Imam to express his opinion about the previous caliphs, to which Imam said, is this really the best time to discuss these things? This could wait. We are going through a turmoil. When the house is on fire, you don't mow the lawn. We are struggling with something else, which is far more superior, and you don't want me to talk about the Khulafa and what happened. But then later on, Imam gives an answer. He said, I will give you a letter containing the answers to your questions, but I request you to safeguard my lost rights. So Imam ﷺ then, gives this very short detail of the time of Jahiliyyat, divides it into a few parts. The first part is, or the first section refers to the condition of the Arabs during the time of Jahiliyyat. The second section talks about the events after the demise of Rasulullah. The third section talks about the story of Amr ibn As and his, getting along with Muawiyah and creating havoc in the society, in the community, misleading people, really taking people and putting them into illusions, in other words, for many things that they committed. And even till this day, people believe in those things and those fairy tales that, of course, were tactics that were used by Amr As. He was considered to be the brains behind many of the things that Muawiyah had committed. So Imam ﷺ talks about these three things. It sometimes is assumed that at the end of this sermon, which calls for the holy war, calls for jihad, contradicts this statement and indicates that these words were uttered by Imam before the Battle of Siffin. As is the case with many of these other khutbahs that we had read in the past as well, were on and around the time of the Battle of Siffin. This could be a part of those khutbahs as well. However, it's possible that this statement refers to another battle for which Imam was trying to prepare people. The sort of words that you see in it are the words that are uttered by a commander-in-chief, trying to rally his group and to get them ready for something big that is about to come. So that's why many have alluded that this could be referring to that. But nonetheless, in these three sections, Imam talks about these moral damages. And then lastly, in the end of the sermon, Imam instructs the people to prepare for the battle to cut off the oppressive and the unjust groups' influence. I think that's what led people to see that. I know that's bothering you guys. I'm not looking up there. Very quickly, the Arabs in the time of Jahiliyyat. Imam al-Salam begins with explaining some of the attributes of the time of the Jahiliyyat and the Arabs in that particular time. So in this section of the sermon, Imam addresses the conditions of the Arabs, offering a remarkably vivid depiction of their lifestyle, how they used to live, what they used to do. Across, 4 dimensions of an individual's life. That is intellectual, what were they able to accomplish intellectually, emotional, economical, and as well as social. And of course, one can debate, was there any intellect? And to an extent, was there any social norms over there? It doesn't seem like they have any social norms, because that's why it's called the time of Jahiliyyat. They lacked a lot of intellect, they lacked a lot of social interactions or the social normalcy that you see in the societies. As well as the economic. Yeah, maybe economically, there was some economic system that was established at that time, but again, these were bloodthirsty people, and they didn't care for the rights of others, and they usurped the properties, and they did anything what they want based on the power and the strength that they possessed, and they would roam around like that as bullies. But nonetheless, if you review all the books written by the people about the conditions of the Arabs in that era, we'd find that nothing beyond what is summarized here in this short sermon, what Imam al-Salam said. So if you're doing a research on the time of Jahiliyyat of the people, look no further. Come to khutbah number 26 of Nahj al-Balagha, and you'll be able to present a very succinct picture in just few words that Imam al-Salam expresses over here. Imam begins by stating, he says, when he talks about it, he says, Inna Allaha ba'atha Muhammadan sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam nadhiran lil alamina wa aminan ala tanzil. The choice of this topic at the beginning of the sermon appears to stem from Imam's intention to remind people of the pre-Islamic past, allowing them to compare it with the condition after the advent of Islam, after Prophet announced, proclaimed the religion of Islam. This comparison helps them appreciate the true worth of what they have gained. A lot of time you really need to spell it out. What was it like before, or in our contemporary times you can say, what was it like before you had your resident alim and after having gotten a resident alim? So you had a center, but you didn't have a scholar. Now you have a center and you have a scholar. Now you compare the two things. I say, yeah, we can compare the two things. Or those centers who had a scholar and then they lost one and now they're without one. Go ahead and ask them, how do they feel? That is a lower level. Here we're talking about Imam, we're talking about Nabi, we're talking about someone who's Khatmul Anbiya. So you didn't have any, and then Allah bestows you with a Rasul, a Nabi, who comes and who changes drastically and brings this reform into you, who spends day and night bringing this reform into you. So your lives transformed, and because of the true values of blessings that becomes evident only when contrasted with their absence in the past. So when you look at they didn't exist back then, and then now you look at when they are existing in the time of Rasulullah. So Imam, rightly so, says, indeed Allah appointed Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and as his messenger to warn the worlds, to caution them against the divine punishment awaiting the tyrants and those who deviate from truth and justice, and entrusted him with safeguarding the revelations of his book. Wa aminan ala tanzil. So explains the duty and the role of Rasulullah, what he was sent with, and what did he do with it. So it's noteworthy that Imam emphasizes only on the role of the Prophet as Nadir, warner. But what have we seen in Quran? Allah described Prophet as Bashir and Nadir. Here see, Imam does not talk about Bashir. He only speaks about Nidarat and Rasul being Nadir, a warner. Even though we know that Prophet is described both as the bearer of glad tidings, Bashir, and as well as the one who brought warnings. And these two have appeared in Quran frequently. Prophet, Allah says in chapter 33, O people, O Prophet, indeed we have sent you as a witness, shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira, mentioned on numerous occasions. However, since the motivation to fulfill the duties and avoid transgression is typically driven by the threat of punishment, not so much by giving incentives for glad tidings. People understand the threat of punishment and then they come to the path more so than when you give them glad tidings. I guess that's the reason Imam, or at least recognizing the people of that time, Imam, instead of talking about the glad tidings, Imam is talking about the severe punishment that entails if you were not to follow the Prophet. So for this reason, many Quranic verses highlight the Prophet and other prophets primarily as warners, and there are no instances where the term bearer of glad tidings appears exclusively by itself. It does come with Nadir, so Bashir and Nadir have come together, but Nadir has come independently as well. There's no place where you find the Rasul or all of the Anbiya are mentioned as Bashir, independent or alone, without the mention of Nadir. So this is where maybe Imam got that inspiration and he only spoke about Rasul being Nadir and did not talk about Rasul being the Bashir. In contemporary legal systems as well, enforcement mechanisms are predominantly based on various forms of penalties and punishments. You look at the legal systems that we have, with positive incentives rarely employed as the primary guarantee for compliance. Unless you're trying to broker a ceasefire, then you give them incentives. But other than that, you don't really see, any compliance will come when incentives are given. Usually, when punishment is offered, when threat is given, people then show restraint and then they go back. So ultimately, the main objective of warning, indar, is to instill a sense of responsibility regarding the duties and obligations which are obligatory upon individuals. So we should not overlook the fact that Prophet, his role as a warner encompasses all people globally and not just the people that he was sent to in Arabia. This, of course, demonstrates the universal and the eternal nature of Islam, how Islam is universal. While you might hear otherwise today in the world, all the bashing of Islam and all the negativity surrounding it because of the acts of few people, those who call themselves to be jihadists, the ISIS and the Talibans and the Boko Harams and all those people have given a very bad name to Islam, and those who commit crimes against humanity, as people of other nations do the same thing, but of course Islam gets highlighted more so, and people have issues with Islam's widespreadness and its quick the way it's spread all over the United States and even the Western world. People start to criticize it more than they criticize other religions. But we understand the universal appeal that Islam has. You put aside all of these negativities that is associated with these people who have given a negative picture of Islam due to their own personal af'al and their actions who had nothing to do with Islam. When you look at the appeal that Islam has, which attracts people from all walks of life, and that's why it is an international, or it is an eternal and universal, rather, message, which other religions fail to offer. They don't have the universality that Islam possesses. And that's not something that you and I as Muslims claim. So, well, any other religion would do the same thing. No, other religions have a hard time having that claim because they're so self-centered. While Islam isn't self-centered, it gives that universal idea. So we should not overlook the fact that Prophet role as a warner is, all encompassing. It's for all ages, and that's why he was referred to as what? Rahmatan lil Alameen. Why? He is sent by Rabbul Alameen, and therefore his message, Quran, is also for Hudan lin Nas wa Bayyinat, right? Zalik al Kitab wa la rayba fi Hudan lin Nas wa Bayyinat. This book is for everyone. Yeah, only those who are muttaqeen, they will get inspiration from it, but the book is for everyone. Anyone and everyone can benefit from this book. So the expression that Imam uses, Aminan ala Tanzil, a trustworthy guardian of the divine revelation, refers to the infallibility of Rasulullah. He refers to that Ameen aspect over here is the infallible nature of the Prophet. Then Imam describes the condition of the Arabs during the age of ignorance, articulating in 10 brief yet profound statements address 4 key dimensions. Imam says, وَأَنْتُمْ مَعْشَرَ الْأَرَبِ عَلَى شَرِّ دِينٍ, that indeed, what religion could be worse than idolatry? He says, this was a time when you, Arab community, had the worst of religions. If there was a religion that they were following, sometimes lack of a religion is also a religion. Those who call themselves to be Gnostics, those who call those who call themselves to be atheists, that itself is a religion that they are following. Lack of religiosity. What could be worse than, doing worse than idolatry? That they used to worship these idols, where an intelligent and a conscious person carves a piece of stone or wood with his own hands and bows in front of it, prostrates to it, seeks sustenance from it, and at time of famine goes ahead and consumes it. If it was made out of some food product, goes ahead and eats it. In addition to this great deviation, their beliefs were filled with superstitions and foolish notions far removed from reasons. I think sometimes we should also rethink some of our foolish superstitions that we have come up with, which are primarily culturally influenced and has nothing to do with Islam. Islam doesn't talk about those superstitions. It's not there. I like to talk more about it, but I'll remain content with what I just said just now. Because if you look at these, some of our superstitions that exist in various parts of the Shia world. One part of Shia world probably is unaware of the other part of the Shia world where these superstitions are taking place. From Hindustan, from India, from certain places in India, in Lucknow and Hyderabad and Pakistan, in certain places in Pakistan, from south to north, other places. And it does exist pretty much in the subcontinent, as if it's not there in Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan. No, it's there as well. They have certain superstitions. You ask them, they'll tell you as well. But majority of time it's lacking any intellect. Then Imam ﷺ said, you lived, I'll go through this quickly, you lived in the worst of houses and the lands, among rough stones and deaf snakes. وَفِي شَرِّ دَارٍ مُنِيخُونَ بَيْنَ حِجَارَةٍ خُشْنٍ وَحِيَّاتٍ سُمٍّ تُشْرَبُونَ الْكَدِرَ وَتَأْكُلُونَ الْجَشِبَ. That you drank polluted water and ate extremely unpleasant food. The expression sharradar, the worst houses, does not refer to how the houses were created, the engineering side of it. Imam, regarding this, talks about the dwelling places of the pre-Islamic era, that although many, especially Imam Ali's audience in this sermon, lived in Mecca and Medina, may indicate that these two cities had completely lost their spiritual character and had become centers for idolatry, evil, and corruption. They were surrounded by sandstorms, scorching winds, and dry and barren desert. and the small amount of water available was found in deep and shallow wells, or the temporary pools that were formed because of that remaining rainfall and the storm, whatever they had. Such water would become so polluted by blowing dust or human contamination that one would detest drinking it. And yet, due to necessity, they had no other choice. They had to drink. And even today, you see in some parts of the world where they don't have pure drinking water, the color of the water that they show, where a lot of these non-government agencies are working to get rid of this, issue there. Imam uses the phrase hayyat as-sum, the deaf snakes, could either imply that the deafness made them especially fearless and aggressive, or that they possessed a particularly deadly venom. So you lived among these snakes who were roaming around. People try and avoid living around the snakes, and you do things to keep these snakes away. But that's what your dwelling was. You were living along with it, and you didn't care and of course these animals that were living along with you, around you, they were venomous, such as the snake that Imam is referring to in particular over here. I'll go through this quickly. Third section, Imam addresses the miserable and social condition and insecurity. He says, وَتَصْفِكُونَ دِمَاءَكُمْ. The Quran talks about it as well. When Hazrat Adam ﷺ was chosen as the Khalifatullah, what was one of the objections that angels raised? What was? أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Are you going to go ahead and make someone to be your Khalifa and your representative who is known for shedding the blood? تَصْفِكُونَ الدِّمَاءَ. Imam refers to these Arabs of Jahiliyyah that you continuously shed each other's blood, using the present tense verb tasfikuna. Imam did not use the past tense that you used to do that. He said tasfikuna. The present, as in other sentences of this passage, indicates the constant and ongoing nature of these disorders among them. So that means what? This is a practice still continues. It's a practice still happening. It's not something that you used to do. So many times, when even Quran talks about it, it says in Surah Ahzab, Ya nisa an-nabi lastunna ka'ahadin min an-nisa, speaking to the wives of the Prophet. O wives of the Prophet, you're not like ordinary women. وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَا تَبَرُّجَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ الْأُولَى. Do not turn back to your Jahili customs. They're still referring to them that there still remains in you those Jahili customs. Those customs which were of ignorance, jahalat, that we deem that era too. So you lived through it, now you have been cleansed, you've come out of it, but in back of your mind, these things are still there. And all it takes for you to go back to those norms. Kind of like someone who's on probation, kind of like someone who's recovering from some bad habit. I won't give the example of alcohol, it's haram in Islam. I'll give example of, those, for example, who used to smoke. And then they stopped it. They stopped smoking. They are on that recovery path of recovery. Something happened, heart-related issue, which of course doctor said you shouldn't smoke anymore. So they start working on it and they're no longer smoking. But that person is so vulnerable. One bad friend or company, one smoke there, boom, back on the path of smoking again. Same thing, I guess, goes with the alcoholics, that they go through the period of their sobriety and then one drink and then they're back. And that goes along across board with everything that you're trying to avoid. Music, a lot of people, they say, well, they stop listening to music. They threw away all their tapes and all their CDs and whatever MP3 players and whatever they have these days. They threw them all away, deleted all of that. But here, inadvertently, you hear a song somewhere, on the news, on the TV, on the radio, and boom, you're back to, okay, I want to listen to it now. you go back to it again because it's all accessible, for example. That happens with any area that you look at it, where a person tries to avoid it, but one ishara towards it, you're right back into it. So it's very, same thing with sinning, haram. There's a haram that you've been avoiding. You avoid, but then first opportunity where you are, exposed to that haram, and it's really tempting, you say, well, okay, maybe just one time. You do that one time, you're right back to square one. So Imam is saying the same thing, that tasfikuna dima is something which was, something that they continue to do. Indeed, their bloodshed needed no significant reason. The slightest excuse, they drew their swords. Right? So many, Quran tells us, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ. You were enemies of one another. Allah united your hearts. أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرَ. You had so much rivalry that you would go to the graveyard to prove this rivalry of yours. You would draw blood. You would draw swords for the smallest of, the conflicts that would arise amongst you. I mean, there was no way of just sitting these two people down and then telling them to remove their differences. So they drew their swords and attacked each other and continued fighting for days, sometimes months and even years. A study of well-known wars of Fijar, which will be mentioned later, demonstrates how those ignorant and heedless people would engage in brutal conflicts and shed each other's blood over trivial matters. Sometimes when you look at the root cause of all of this, was petty things. And that led to, this whole ordeal. And in the fourth section, the Imam refers to the dreadful emotional state by saying you continually severed ties of kinship. وَتَقْطَعُونَ أَرْحَامَكُمْ. Again, present tense is being used. تُسْفِكُونَ دِمَاءَ, continuous, and تَقْطَعُونَ الْأَرْحَامَ, that you sever ties of kingship. This phrase alludes specifically of the practice of or burying their daughters alive, and then killing their children even, not just the daughters, killing their children min khashyatil amlak, because of poverty. This ayat talks about it in chapter 16, Surah Nahl, 58, 59, that and when one of them is given the good news of the birth of a female, his face darkens and he suppresses grief. He hides himself from the people because of the ill of which he was informed. He asks himself, shall he keep it in humiliation or bury it in the ground? And then the Quran says, unquestionably, evil is what they decide. What did they end up doing? They ended up burying the daughters alive. So at times, they did not limit themselves to killing only their daughters, but also killed their sons, who were considered foundation of their livelihood out of the fear of poverty. And for that reason, Quran also highlights it. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةَ إِمْلَاقٍ نَحْنُ نَرْزُقُهُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ. You fear poverty, you fear that you won't be able to feed them. We feed them. And we feed you as well. And what are you worried about it? That you're killing and taking their lives. And at the end of this discourse, with two concise statements, Imam summarizes the moral and material corruption of their society. Al-asnamu fikum mansuba wal-athamu bikum ma'suba. Idols were erected among you, and sins had tightly bound you. The word mansuba from nasb, किसी चीज़ को नस्ब कर देना, suggests that they not only felt no shame in idol worship, but even took pride in it, placing idols prominently throughout their societies. Inside the Kaaba, outside the Kaaba, in their houses, outside their houses, and naming an idol for every occasion, for every place, and for every day, and for every month. The term mansuba is derived from the root, asaba, which is, or rather ma'asuba, is derived from the word asaba, which refers to the tendons that connect the bones and the muscles. So you know how they're connected, and this is of course a feature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His marvel, the way He designed insan. Here signifies the deep entanglement of sins with their, very being. These sins include bloodshed, murder, severing family ties, violating the honor of others, plundering wealth, indulging in gambling, wine, sexual immorality, all of which had thoroughly engulfed the pre-Islamic Arab society. Thus, in these brief yet profound statements, Imam highlights their ideological and moral corruption, along with their economical, emotional distress, the four areas of degradation, each deserving its own detailed discussion, inshallah, in the next two sections of this khutbah, where we will address those things. Wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.